This is Zach Sokolov presenting a follow-up report to my final defensive practice. According to my final score, I need to place more focus on collecting student data and using that data to inform how I teach subsequent lessons. I will first explain how I gather and analyze data with reference to my initial block plan. I will then describe the additional steps I'm taking to ensure that data-based decision-making is an active part of my classroom for both myself and my students. I must give one quick disclaimer. The lesson that I delivered on Friday and will discuss in this video does not coincide with my original block plan. I had to make some adjustments to my teaching schedule to accommodate school site considerations. The math department at my school was moving toward a common curriculum, and I was forced to push back some of my work with systems of equations until after winter break. In my classroom, data collection comes in several forms. First, there is the reflective data I receive from my students. These typically consist of quick exit slips where the students rate their overall level of understanding of the material covered in class that day. I also have students fill out reflective exit slips on the days preceding more formal assessments where they identify what learning targets they understand well and which they do not. I use this data to alter my lessons for the following day. I study the results the night the exit slips are collected and begin by examining what gaps in content comprehension exist. If there is a specific skill that needs to be retaught, I do one of a few things. The first option is to have our daily do now focus on that relevant skill. This gives my students a chance to review the previous day's work and receive extra practice. The second option is finding a way to have my students insert the skill into their deductive structured notes by creating a brain bubble. And the third option is spiraling my active practice to make sure I include a few questions that relate to the skill in question. I also use this data to dictate which students I target in the following day's lesson, either by way of question asking or one-on-one help during active practice. I will make sure to involve the struggling students in the lesson as soon as possible by posing lower-level questions that will help them build confidence. I will also spend more individual time during practice with students who indicated they weren't as comfortable with the material. The second type of data is hard evidence, problems that my students have done that reveal who does and does not understand the learning target. This, again, can come in the way of an exit slip or other medium like a quiz. This allows me to see which students can solve the question correctly and provide the necessary justification, which can solve the question but cannot provide the proper explanation, and which are still challenged to solve the question at all. The third type of data I collect is more on the spot and informal. This can manifest itself in a simple check for understanding during notes. I will ask my students to use their fingers to tell me if they matched me, if they were on the right track, or if they took a different path. This gives me in-the-moment data on which students are following along and which need more support later on in the lesson. I also have made an effort to include more JTPSs in my notes so students can engage with the material right away. I found in my initial class transcript that a majority of the student voice was call and response. A student would answer a question, which often only required a short response, and then I would resume my talking. I want my students to play a more vocal role in each lesson, and I think that establishing JTPSs as a permanent fixture in my classroom is a good way to do that. The one aspect of data-driven decision-making that I have yet to fully implement into my classroom is learning target logs. This allows students to keep a record of their progress, and they are able to reference this information whenever they need to decide what learning targets they should spend time practicing. Over winter break, I'm going to create individualized learning target trackers that I will introduce upon returning to school. In addition to reflecting on how well they know the various learning targets, students will be writing down all the grades they receive in the class, making this a one-stop shop for the data they need to direct their learning. All of these practices are supported by trusted researchers in the field of education. ETS, in their paper Assessment for Learning to Improve Schools, explains how important it is for both adults and students to use data to determine where their academic effort is best directed. By involving students in this process, their self-awareness is improved, as well as their confidence, and these contribute to higher academic performance. Further, Paul Black and Dylan William espouse the benefits of formative assessment in their book Inside the Black Box. This happens when teachers deliver information to the students about their performance to help the child learn better. This can be done by the teacher by way of descriptive feedback, but ultimately it must be done by the student himself. In my lesson on Friday, I included a few of these structures into the day's activity. First, students engaged in a JTPS with their table partner during note-taking. They were asked to explain the process for converting a point-slope equation into a slope-intercept equation, and this was designed to make sure my students were actively engaging with the material as opposed to simply copying it down. Then, at the end of the lesson, I had my students fill out a reflective exit slip. They indicated their level of understanding on a scale of 1 to 5, and then picked one topic from the day that they needed to review more thoroughly. I used the informal data I collected with the JTPS to help me identify which students needed individual assistance during our whiteboard work. Here is a short clip of my class that shows my students during their JTPS. It is difficult to hear exactly what they are saying, but I will include my PowerPoint slide to clarify the task. I also used the reflective data from the exit slips to help me design active practice for the following lesson. After I teach point-slope form, we move to finding the equation of a line when all we're given is 2 points. These two lessons complement each other well, and I made sure my students would practice converting a point-slope form equation into a slope-intercept form equation. I also included a point-slope form brain bubble in my PowerPoint and have a list of students who I will call on during lesson to check on their understanding. Finally, I have included data I collected after our last test as well. I had my students complete a very comprehensive reflection sheet that forced them to think about which learning targets they knew well, which they did not, and how they studied for this test. I also had my students complete model cards for the problems they got wrong, all of which contribute to deepening their awareness of their own knowledge. These are practices I want to make permanent, as I feel that reflective data ought to be collected both before assessments, what do I think I know and what do I think I need to study more, and after assessments, what did I demonstrate I know and what still challenges me. Overall, I'm happy with the progress I've made on this front, and I'm optimistic that my use of data will become increasingly more central to my teaching as the year continues.